Hey you guys, welcome to the first episode of Reports on China. I'm Andy, a New Zealander living and working in China. Today we're going to take a look at Fox News' awkward, unintentional admission, an Australian 60 Minutes report that will definitely make you laugh, and a surprisingly fair Radio New Zealand podcast about China. Let's get reporting. Hey, I'm Andy. I've always been obsessed with media. I started my own neighbourhood newspaper at 10, and my own TV channel at 15. At 19, I launched a national magazine that was available all over New Zealand. I worked for New Zealand politicians for a few years before our Prime Minister gave me a scholarship to come to China and study a master's degree in Chinese language and culture. I decided to stay, and now I'm a columnist and filmmaker in Shanghai. Come with me as I analyse how the world reports on China. Last week, China celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. Media reports around the world focus on President Xi Jinping's speech, which led America's Fox News to possibly have made an awkward admission.
Top story, China's President Xi Jinping making a veiled threat against the United States, warning that his country will not be bullied by foreign adversaries, saying that any threats would be met with a, quote, Great Wall of Steel. All this during a speech at the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, first point. President Xi specifically said that China's never bullied, oppressed or enslaved the people of other nations, and China will never allow foreign forces to bully, oppress or enslave the Chinese people. He never mentioned any nation specifically. His comments were aimed generally at anyone who might attempt to bully, oppress or enslave the Chinese people. So doesn't Fox News coming out and specifically saying this is a threat against the United States in some way act as an admission that the USA is planning to bully, oppress or enslave the Chinese people?
Now, it's statements like this that lead you to believe that China has become emboldened. President Xi was not talking like this a year or two ago.
Point number two. President Xi wasn't talking like this a year ago because anti-China rhetoric and attacks weren't at an all-time high this time a year ago. Chinese people overseas weren't facing such a high level of anti-Asian hate this time a year ago. This is a defensive statement on China's behalf, aimed at warning foreign forces to back off. Is President Xi emboldened? Well, he kind of has to be.
You know, they talk about enslaving, that they've never enslaved anybody, but there are millions, if you consider the Chinese people themselves, who are basically slaves of that government or have been at various times.
And those words are powerful, David.
Yes, he really just suggested that the Chinese people are slaves to the Chinese government. This is obviously an outrageous statement, and to be honest, I'm really not sure where it comes from or what the logic is. What makes someone a slave to a government? Is he talking about the requirement to pay taxes or to follow local laws? If so, then every single person on the planet is a slave to a government. But that's not usually the language the average person uses when discussing the relationship between the people and the state. But when Western media talks about China, too often the hats are off. And using terms like slaves when referring to Chinese people fits into the ideas many Fox viewers have in their minds already of the Chinese people as being enslaved by an evil dictatorship. So I suggest you come to China and have a chat with any Chinese person. You'll not only learn a lot, but you might even make a friend if you're lucky. Moving down under now to an advertisement for an Australian 60 Minutes program, attacking New Zealand for stepping back from other Five Eyes partners on key matters relating to China. Now, the Aussies are currently facing a trade backlash from China, and now they're trying to suggest that New Zealanders are somehow turning our backs on our so-called tight friendship with Australia in exchange for a closer relationship with China. Now, firstly, as a Kiwi myself, I find it quite ironic that Australia is trying to claim we were ever best friends. Kiwis living in Australia are treated extremely poorly when they're hit with tough times, while Aussies living in New Zealand are treated exactly the same as locals. Anyway, check out this perhaps unintentionally hilarious trailer by Australian 60 Minutes.
Tom Steinford from 60 Minutes. Do you sometimes have to bite your tongue of upsetting the regime in Beijing?
No.
Just what are the Kiwis up to now?
It's very much a deal with the devil.
On 60 Minutes, we thought they were our best friends. But it looks like they've ditched us.
Step right up.
For a fast Chinese buck. Could it be that New Zealand is turning into New Zealand?
I reject the premise of the question.
Sunday on 9 and 9 Now.
Wow, this advertisement is so completely over the top and dramatised that you might think you're watching the trailer for an upcoming horror or thriller that's about to hit cinemas, and not the ad for a so-called respected news and current affairs program that's been running for 40 years? I have to say the full piece being advertised didn't do much better, employing emotionally manipulative tactics to paint China as evil. Now, one trick media often use to subliminally tweak the emotions of viewers is music. In the 19-minute piece, for example, the Chinese flag was shown in 2 close-ups, and the New Zealand flag featured in 1 close-up. Now, take a listen to the music taken for each shot.
And if you don't, basically you're the loser.
Australia's sovereignty is never for sale.
But I think that the government has made the right call.
Australia.
That's appropriate for us.
On top of that, not a single Chinese person featured in the piece, which not only goes against one of the fundamental ethical principles of Australian media, which is to provide full, fair and balanced reports, but it also allows for China to be dehumanized in a way in the eyes of viewers. In a piece that's fundamentally about nationality, culture and ethics and how they might collide in relationships between 3 countries, the lack of a Chinese point of view was shocking, but also expected. Lastly today, we're going to take a quick look at a slightly fairer and more balanced report on China, this time in the form of a podcast from Radio New Zealand. A segment on the podcast talks about New Zealand's trade relationship with China, worth about $23 billion a year, which is being called into question by a retired security advisor to Donald Trump, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Now, he thinks New Zealand should step back from trade with China and instead embrace our so-called real friends. He refers to China's growth as the China threat. Now, the program fairly mentions, among all the bile that he spews, that listeners may rightly doubt McMaster's advice since he played a key role in the invasion of Iraq under President Bush, an invasion which ultimately had no basis and led to the deaths of countless innocent civilians and chaos and destabilization not only in that country, but in the entire region. But what makes this podcast fairer than other reports is that a popular figure who supports China was given ample time to state his views. That person was former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Sir John Key, who mentioned that he's close friends with President Xi Jinping, has had many personal conversations with him about China's hopes and dreams. Now, he says China's growth is not the threat that many claim.
Maybe I'm biased, but I've had the privilege, and I'd count it as that, as having quite a lot of one-on-one dinners and conversations with Xi Jinping. And when you really say to them, what's the dream? What is all this about? It's to develop the country to a point where they are smart, efficient, actually environmentally quite sound, lifting people out of poverty and giving people opportunity and hope.
Like I mentioned with the 60 Minutes piece, it's common for China to be underrepresented or not represented at all in reports criticizing the country. That's ironic since these reports come from Western nations where journalists are meant to strongly uphold the values of balance and fairness. Radio New Zealand did a good job here. While they gave what I personally believe is a bit too much credit to a retired general with a checkered past, they let him freely express his negative views on China. But then they brought in another voice to offer some balance. This is real journalism. I hope we get to see more and more balanced and fair reports on China in upcoming episodes. Anyway, that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.